Thank you so much, Pragati. All right, so let's start the session as we are like already 2 or 3 minutes away. And meanwhile, we also have a watching of like 2 to 300 people on our YouTube channel also. So those who, due to time strains, are not able to join, they will surely be watching the recorded session on YouTube also. All right, good evening to all those who have joined. Welcome to Sai Connect, your go-to platform for insightful discussions and meaningful transformative ideas. I am Nandini, and here I am with my wonderful co-host Divyansh. Together, we are so excited to kickstart our latest series of sessions titled Evolving Mind, Trauma, Communication, and the Future of Healing. It like generally happens that life often presents us with invisible barriers that although we are not able to see, but it just shapes our connections and relationships either in a good way or sometimes bad as well. And this series is actually going to be a heartfelt exploration of those barriers. So today's episode will be delving into the invisible wall, trauma's role in romantic relationships, and this thought provoking topic will explore the profound impact that these traumas can have on our intimacy and connections. So, we are also very honored to have our esteemed guest speaker, Ms. Palak Agrawal, ma'am. So, first of all, a very heartfelt welcome to you, ma'am, on PsyConnect. Would you like to greet the audience before we actually go with our questions and all?
Yeah, thank you so much for your warm welcome. I would love to interact with all the audience that's present today because it's a deep honor for me also that they've spared their time for this, and we're going to cover a very important topic. So I'm glad to be a part of this platform and looking forward to this session altogether.
All right, thank you so much, ma'am. So, for those who have joined, I just want to make you all assured once that in case you will be having any doubt in mid of the session, you can type them in the chat box also. We will having an eye on it. Also, you can raise your hands if you have something very important to ask at that moment. Otherwise, we will be taking all the questions towards the end of the session. So now sit, relax, and have the enjoyment of this conversation. All right, ma'am. So, starting with this session, the title that we are having, the invisible wall. Very first, we are so keen to know what does this term invisible actually mean in context of trauma and relationship.
Right. Firstly, Nani, I'd like to begin by introducing myself and telling my audience the work that I do. Because,
If you don't mind, can I go ahead with that?
oh, yes, sure.
I have a beautiful
Sure.
introduction for you.
Okay, okay. Yes, please. Then we
All
shall
right.
start with
So,
that.
yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. So, before getting ahead, I would just like you all to know about Palak Agrawal, ma'am. So, ma'am is an RCI licensed clinical psychologist with an MPhil in clinical psychology from the esteemed National Forensic Science University. And specializing in trauma focused narrative therapy, she is also trained in cognitive processing therapy from the Medical University of South Carolina with experience in esteemed institutions like AIMS, Sir Gangaram Hospital, and BIMHANS. She has worked extensively on medico legal cases and psychometric assessments. A passionate mental health advocate, ma'am has just conducted workshops and in organizations for such as Air Force Families Welfare Association, BSF, and JCB as well. And now she is currently serving as a consultant at Vimhans Nayati Hospital. So I hope this introduction of ma'am is now had made all of you more curious to know about her invaluable knowledge in the field. And yeah, now ma'am, we would love to hear the things now from you.
Thank you, Nandini, for such a warm and lovely introduction. I think you summarized it beautifully, more than I could. So, beginning with what you asked, the word invisible. Invisible wall. So, I think this word invisible holds a great significance when we talk about psychological wounds, particularly. Because these are the wounds which are not visible. These are not physiologically seen. You can't see them and you can't put a cover to them. But they're manifested in our behavior, they're manifested in our day-to-day life and functioning. So when we talk about the word invisible, it's like an unseen yet very deep kind of a wound, right? So when we say a wall, it's like a guardedness, or like a defense that we put to, deal with something overwhelming or something that has shaken our lives, particularly in terms of trauma. So may not be visible, yet very deep and very very I would say very strong, deep, and implicitly very charging wound that influences our life, something of maybe past or maybe happening on a very chronic basis, or something happened as a single episode yet having a very profound effect.
Exactly, exactly. Sometimes we are absolutely not able to see or even feel that wounds on that particular moment, but how it affects us in the later time is just disastrous. Thank you so much, Ma'am, for just the entire meaning of the title so precisely. Now, what would you like to say about those relationships that originates from childhood, basically from our caregivers, or we can see from parents, how that parental conflict or say the parental neglect can impact the adult relationships, particularly in terms of that intimacy or yeah, like intimacy or adult relationships.
Yes, as we know, we're all from the fraternity of psychotherapy and psychology, and we know how, early childhood attachments and parental interaction influences a child's life and their adulthood also. So, it's very important that your early childhood is treated rightly, and that's why I think it's very essential for parents also to go for parental counseling before, they should be ready before a child arises, because if so, if you're not ready, and if you're following certain approaches, like you said, like a very neglectful parenting style or a very very authoritarian parenting style where you're using strict measures to control child and all, it impacts child, and many studies, many researchers in psychology has proven that childhood traumas leads to difficulties in adult relationships, particularly when we talk about situations and circumstances when it comes to intimacy or deeper relationships, right? People may struggle with those intimate partner relationships and all because of an unhealed wound, right? Because early childhood forms a basis of learning about future relations. I'm not saying those cannot be addressed and those cannot be worked upon. They can be worked upon. And, when people experience different adult healthy relationships, they understand that how sometimes, parent child relationship was faulty, but this is a healthy relationship. But sometimes what happens, those childhood wounds are very, very deep, and that's when people find it hard to even adapt in a healthier relationship. Their response might be of some withdrawn responses, some overly anxious or dependency kind of a responses, or always feeling on the edge. There's sometimes even in relationships, people are always feeling guarded. They're wanting to seek assurances. They're always feeling that they're going to be abandoned, and they go on to take extreme steps to prevent that abandonment. So, all this could be understood from trauma lens, which talks about not pathologizing a person, rather looking at the person, from that lens that I don't know what has gone wrong with you, but I'm interested to know what has happened to you. What's your story? So I think when you give that space for hearing that story, you'll discover that so much the person, the cognitions that they are having today, the difficulties in the relationship that they are having today, the coping patterns that they're showing up today are very much associated with difficult childhood experiences.
Exactly, as you are saying that whatever the lacking is there in the childhood of a child, it
Hmm.
results somehow in the adult relationships, like they want complete reassurance again and again. So, is it something like, I'm just curious to know, is it completely psychological or it has some, we can say uh, some brain changes as well? Not only psychological, is it something somatic as well?
The response can be definitely very, very somatic. There are researches. In fact, many trauma focused approaches has proven that trauma is just not stored in the mind; it's stored in the body too. Your body also responds to traumatic events, right? Especially when we talk about implicit memory, which is a memory or a flashback in trauma. Supposedly, suddenly, like there's a wave of memory that I'm not ready to deal with, that I've just shut and I've just put like a cover to that memory, shows up. It charges my body. It feels like it's happening right away. There are many researchers, trauma focused researchers, that have discovered that people who have witnessed trauma, to them it feels like time zones have been confused. It's like they're re-experiencing, reliving all of it, and their body might go into hypo or hyper arousal state, which means either they'll be too overwhelmed, or they'll just not respond to a situation, or may respond like completely indifferent to a situation. So all these things are not just psychological, rather physiological also. Many trauma focused therapists are now using somatic work. Many of them are using approaches like EMDR and all these talks about involving body also along with mind. So trauma is just not an event, it's rather your response to that event, and your body responds and so does your mind.
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you so much, ma'am, for briefing this out. And what would you say about the different kinds of attachment styles that usually we had with our parents, and somehow it affects the relationships when we are adult? So, what kind of attachment styles impacts in what kind of relationships?
Attachment, basically, the term attachment can be described as an emotional bond between a parent and a child, right? And we have seen many experiments have been conducted that the better the bond between the infant and the caregiver, later on the healthier the coping style is of the adulthood, right? Not to say that those people will not experience stressors and all, or maybe those won't have like difficult life events, but we have seen that the coping is slightly better. So because what it does is, the early attachment phase, it enables you to establish groundwork of love, care, and support. As humans, we all have that need for belongingness, safety, and comfort. So, attachment talks about, as a caregiver, I need to be ready to welcome the child in the world, providing him or her with that safety and comfort, right? And establishing that trust, because child to a child, it feels like he's dethroned in the world, right? And when that child is dethroned in the world, they're constantly seeking that comfort. A lot of time when I'm working in clinics, so in today's times, as parents, we are also working, managing children, so it gets complex to give time to your child, right? So a lot of time they say that we can't be sitting at home and constantly being a provider to a child. It's not about you being 24/7 available. It's about that quality time. Imagine if you're just giving 2 hours a day. But even if you're giving like 2 hours a day to that child, be present with your child. You have to be emotionally and physically present, right? The child shouldn't feel like they are being neglected, they are being dejected, their needs are not being taken care of, they're not feeling heard, because those create that deep wound, that I am trying my best to gather attention. I'm trying my best to highlight my needs, but they are being unseen, unheard. Now, what it does in adult relationships is that sometimes certain adults may respond by, constantly feeling anxious, right? Some people might become very suspicious in their adult healthy relationship also, that this person is going to leave me, abandon me, or hurt me, or cause pain to me. So they're very suspicious of their partner and have paranoid tendencies. Some people may act withdrawn and completely indifferent, like they learn that if my needs were not met in childhood, this person can also not hear my needs. So I don't have to do anything with the emotions, with expression of needs and all. So they're acting very indifferent, withdrawn in relationships. Now we have seen that there are four more forms of attachment styles that usually our field talks about. Particularly theory proposed by John Bowlby, which talks about connectedness, and it's based on providing that sense of security as well as trust to the child, right? I think someone's raising their hand to ask
Yeah,
something.
it's
Is
our
it?
co-host only. Divyansh, would you like to add something in it?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Yeah, yeah.
Myself, Divyansh Bond. I am the co-host for today's meeting. And while you were discussing about the fact that when the early childhood needs are not met,
Hmm.
the person becomes hopeless or he becomes indifferent.
Hmm.
So, what is the way to remove that indifference from his or her mind so that he again begins to uh, focus
Yes.
or trust on that other individual? That is my key concern for your question.
Thank you, Divyansh, for putting forth this question because that's very important, right? Uh, Problems and stressors are there, and we need to work on the solution part also. So, thank you for highlighting that point. That what do we do about it, right? So, we'll be covering that. Nandini, I think in the last half of the segment is going to cover like what should be the right steps, what should a person do, and that's when is it okay if I take that up in a greater detail?
Yeah, ma'am, sure, no problem.
Okay, I'll come to that for sure, right? That will be on my mind and we'll tap onto it that what does a person need to do. But just to briefly summarize, like with sometimes withdrawn and avoidant tendencies, like you said, they make hard for people to establish intimacy, right? So beginning to trust the other person that even if I express my needs, it's going to enhance my quality of relationship. That's going to be hard. But unlearning what you have learned as a young child, and you have to kind of, let some amount of your feeling opened up in the present relationship, see how the other person responds, and it's a process, right? The more and more you start expressing, and then when you see that the other person is also catering to it, not to completely overwhelm them but also expressing, and if the other person is also respectful of that, and a mutual sharing space becomes, you actually unlearn a lot of things of childhood, and you try and understand that okay, trust can also feel like this. So you have to kind of open yourself up by becoming firstly aware of your own patterns, understanding that it wasn't your fault. Firstly, you learn to respond that way over because of certain experiences, but you can also at the same time open yourself up to newer experiences. That's
It is
accountability.
it is important also because at the beginning childhood phase is a very delicate phase, and what impressions one encounter on oneself cannot be uh, shedded or looked haywire or else, or in another sense it cannot be done. So it is a very delicate phase, so it should be treated with care. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's most formative period of life, right? When we are learning about the world, our first understanding of the world comes from that space. So it's a very delicate, sensitive space where you're knowing so much about the world through the caregiver's lens.
It sometimes happens like they do not even feel that they are creating some kind of mess or conflict in the child's life. But it sometimes happens in the flow of that moment or something, and the child is not even able to speak because they are already a lot much more older than them. And that somehow results in every kind of mess in the relationships in the later phases of life.
Absolutely. Sometimes, as parents, even if we are not trying to harm our child and all, it's very important to know what's parenting like. Parenting is just not biological. It's a very emotional, psychological. It's a whole process. It's just not giving birth to your child. It's like you're raising, you're growing a plant every day. You're seeding it. You're shaping it so much, so much.
Yeah.
So it's
So,
it's
yeah.
yeah.
Would you like to add something, Divyansh?
Yes, that's what I agree with, ma'am. That although I am not a parent, but I see when I see my parents do stuff for me, like calling me every other day to check if I am all right or not, when going somewhere to visit or play, or when I go on a tour, they ask from me, "Are you okay? Have you taken your food, your medications?" So it is not that easy to become a parent. It takes a huge responsibility, So I can connect with ma'am and totally agree what she said.
Thank you. Thank you, Devyansh. Yes, so we were talking about the attachment. I guess we will get back to it. So I think I was talking about four forms of attachment, right?
Yes, yes.
So where there's secure attachment, which is like a healthy parenting style. The child learns to trust the caregiver. The child learns that parents are usually responding to the child's need. That quality time that I was giving you an example of, right? If you're able to spend like 2-3 hours in a day with your child, give that time to your child, cater to their needs, listen to them what they are trying to say. If you're not able to understand, ask what do you mean, check in with, like Divyansh said, that my parents always check in, right? How are they feeling, what are they thinking about it? Because remember, as parents we have so much going on, but your child just have you, right? They are just understanding the world through you, so you're an important figure. So
And
um
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
does not and it does not decrease with age. As we grow older, they also uh, but that they don't stop caring for us, and we start caring for them as well, so it becomes a cycle. That's what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a reciprocal relationship, definitely. Especially in Indian context, Indian culture may indigenize or Asian cultures may, it's a very reciprocal kind of a dynamic where we are also reciprocating that love. In different countries, it's reciprocated in different forms. But in India, it's reciprocated in a very yes, yeah.
Internet connection.
Yes. So, talking about the attachment patterns, we have to kind of, we were talking about the secure attachment style where parents are responsive to the child needs. Child learns about the world as a healthy space where they're going to be heard and they're going to feel accepted and acknowledged. But sometimes these attachment styles can take different forms of either feeling very, very neglected, withdrawn, avoidant, or very, very anxious, right? If a parent is over involved, like too much of always guarding or very, very authoritarian kind of an approach, wherein they're establishing very strict do's and don'ts and using strict and harsh measures of punishment, or maybe a parent being over involved by stating, oh, this you cannot do, this you can do, and not letting that child explore. So it's not a healthy space. It's a space where a parent is not letting the child be as they want to be. The child might act as very paranoid or very, very anxious in their adult relationships also, which can be marked by a lot of dependency in adult relationships, difficulty in decision making, not being able to assert oneself, not feeling confident, and struggling with self esteem issue. The third form is, like we talked about, a very neglectful parenting, right? If a parent is completely withdrawn, like I'm there but physiologically, but I'm not there emotionally, or trying to cater my child's needs. The child will learn that, okay, world is an unsafe space and I have to shut my needs because that won't be heard. And as adults, I might approach the relationship as being very indifferent, withdrawn, where their emotions, sometimes when people say that they don't want to do emotions and all, like just let it be a very factual, superficial relationship and all. So these are the patterns, how early attachment work influences your adult relationship. It's pretty deep.
They seek assurance from their peers who might get into some bad evil habit, and not contact frequently with their parents who always give us the right path. So it might be difficult for them to manage the adult life.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes. So,
Yeah, now coming to a question that is quite, I would say, relevant for those who are unable to follow a healthy pattern of relationship and continuously trying to figure out what is the reason behind that. So, like, how does that fear of intimacy stemming from the past traumas, from childhood or whether the adolescence period, how does it affect the quality or say the entire depth of their relationship? What are the challenges that the people can face and how can they try to come out of that?
yeah. Fear of intimacy is very important. Fear of intimacy is actually a response in adult relationships, right? Of your wounds. Wounds where you have had like a history of neglectful parenting, where your needs were not heard. So, intimacy creates that fear. Okay, it's a completely different space, completely different world where I have to do emotions. And I've not had an experience of um, dealing with emotions, vocalizing my emotional needs, or experiencing emotions, or catering to someone's emotional needs. So, for people who are very, very avoidant and, have a very withdrawn kind of an approach because of neglectful parenting, may have deep fear of intimacy. That intimacy is something like an overwhelming space where they cannot be themselves. To them it can feel like it's an encroachment to privacy when their partner is basically seeking very basic thing, emotions, right? That's the grounding of any relationship. But that can be perceived as, oh, you're being too much, you're being too demanding, you're being too emotional, I don't do emotions, you're taking away my space, or you're encroaching my privacy. Just stay, physically just stay, but don't vocalize, don't talk about emotions, don't ask for commitment, trust, on all these constructs, they're too heavy for me. So responses like these might show up in your adult relationships because of fear of intimacy, because that's something that the person has not experienced at all. So for them it's very alien, right? And it can feel like, even though they would want it, lacking that deficit or that skill might feel like, I'm dealing with a completely different space altogether, and I don't want to do this. So they're very ambivalent. One part of it might want it also, the other part of it might not be very, very ready for it also, right? And again, going back to the history of early childhood trauma, not looking at it from a lens where this person is a bad person. Maybe, especially in therapeutic work, we don't see bad and good, but we try and understand that behavior. Where is that behavior coming from? What do you think is has shaped that behavior? What have you learned about emotions? If you just ask them, their responses are usually like, oh, what emotions are, what are emotional needs. It's so alien. So fear of intimacy is actually a very overwhelming feeling. They would want to, but it's hard to trust in that space.
Right? If we just try our best to come out of that situation, even, but don't know from where again that feeling of losing the things out or not having the control over the other partner, like turns out to be in the feed. Very
Yeah.
traumatic.
Yeah.
All right, Divyansh, now I am handing over the rest of the questions to you. You can now proceed with it.
So far, ma'am has told us about the emotional trauma, the foundations of how emotional trauma stems up right from our childhood, that either unwillingly or willingly it comes in many forms upon us, and disturbs us psychologically and physiologically. So now we shift our focus on the volunteering aspect of the trauma, like when the partner is abusive and he knows that, and the victim is unable to cope up with his behavior because he has to live with that abusive partner. So emotional dependency on abuse, what it feels like to be emotionally dependent on an abusive partner, that is my question. And how does it shape decisions to stay or leave the relationship?
See, when we talk about abusive relationships now, a lot of times, especially in our context or other contexts also, it differs from individual to individual. Many a times, people don't have resources to, you know, to meet their basic needs and safeguard themselves. They don't, right? If it's in a context of a space where they don't have the financial resources, if they don't have their basic needs, and there's no program for rehabilitation, so in that case the person has nowhere to go instead of just being in that space.
Just be a victim of their surroundings.
Not a, you see, you cannot label anybody as victim, right? You cannot, because when we say a victim, we are looking at them as like a, uh, in a very negative form, but we can always say a survivor. I think that's a better word. So in the context, firstly we need to assess that do they have their basic rehabilitation space also, because a lot of time people who are underprivileged or they don't have that space to go, unfortunately for a lot of reasons they are bound to stay in that space, right? We know spaces like that, but a lot of time it happens people have resources and still feel like they cannot get rid of those abusive spaces, because what happens is the identities are broken by the abuser or the perpetrators convinces you that you cannot survive without them.
That
Like
was my
world
next
is,
question.
yeah, yeah. So I'm going to connect the two questions and then answer it. That they firstly what they do is the tactics part. I remember that. Um, they make it all about themselves. They show you that identity is somewhere, your identity is of no identity, rather your identity is dependent on my identity, right? You are nobody without me. And if you leave me, then you can't survive. World is too dangerous. So bear the abuse, bear the unfortunate circumstances that you are in, but don't go out there because you're nobody. Secondly, what they do is sometimes when people are abusive or perpetrator, they use very, very malicious tactics to convince you that you are the reason, or maybe the abuse is happening because of external reason. Like they might say that, oh, you did this, that's why I have hit you. Oh, you did this, that's why I kind of slapped you. They make it about the person, that you deserve the injustice because you
But
are like that person.
that
So
is does not justify their wrongdoing with the
absolutely, absolutely it doesn't.
survivor.
An abuse can never ever be justified.
Yes.
Right? And people mask their wrongdoings in that sense that they blame it on the person, like you deserved it.
It leads to a cycle of trauma and may result in a trauma bond
Yes.
where the first he reinforces some desirable behavior which is done by the perpetrator, and then they abuse and then they give some assurance and it turns into a cycle which makes it
Mm.
inescapable for the survivor to come out
Mm.
of, and it
Mm.
leads to long lasting lifelong imprints on that person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you said that, it's a very long lasting impression where it feels like my whole existence is in question. The person is always confused about their identity. The person is always blaming themselves, like I deserved it, what has happened to me. So they internalize that abuse. It's not the abuser's or a perpetrator's behavior. A lot of time, young children, especially when they are in an unhealthy or a dysfunctional family or an environment, they're convinced that okay, you did this and that's why you deserve this treatment.
Yes.
So the child, as an adult, especially we see in therapy, they might blame themselves for all the wrongdoings that they have gone through, right? And then you unlearn, and then you teach them how to unlearn these constructs and not to self blame that for those things that have happened to
Sometimes
them.
it becomes too late because at the age, the formative years were spent in in the isolation and trauma and malpractices on the individual. So now he loses all his confidence. That is also a reason that
Yes,
he is not able to cope up and cope up when he becomes an adult and fully functioning. His functioning in the society becomes very problematic, and he has to ush- and he has to rely on other person for his survival and maintenance. So that leads to a very toxic kind of relationship.
absolutely, absolutely, that's
I think by
valid.
time it just engraved in the survivors also that we are like this, we are the way we are, and the things that are going on are definitely there are more or less our fault as well. And somehow they, like we say, they learned helplessness. They can't even try to get out of that trouble.
Yes. So
Absolutely.
that is the next question. Then how does past trauma make it hard for people to leave the toxic relationships even when they know it's bad for them?
See, when we talk about the difficulties, like I said, that it varies from individual to individual. So, first and foremost, and the most basic reason could be that sometimes people don't have the resources for rehabilitation. That's the most basic thing. Secondly, a lot of time, even though that they have resources, their identity is somewhere, their identities are established that they cannot survive in the world without the perpetrator. Perpetrator is this, especially narcissist people, they create this grandiose image of themselves that you cannot survive or you cannot thrive without that person. So if you were to if you're somebody, it is because of them, and in between they might, to manipulate you or to use certain tactics to remain, to ensure that you're staying in that space. They might deliberately say those words of assurance that okay, I'm always going to be with you, and I'm always, you cannot do without me, so you should not ever leave me. And that conditioning itself is so deep that even though the person might want to escape out of it, they find it hard to let go.
But it is very infrequent, like it is not very regular, the reinforcement, I guess.
No, Devyansh, I think what you're saying is varies from person to person. In most cases, it is frequent. It's a very deep conditioning. That's why people find it hard to leave. No,
No, I was talking about the positive aspect that when they genuinely make them feel loved and
see for somebody who loves you will not do this to you. That's not love, right? You have to understand that's a very selfish motive of you not wanting to go. So I'm just breadcrumbing you. You might use the term breadcrumbing, or just throwing small acts or gestures of portraying it as an act of love. But that's not love. Somebody who will love you, why will they abuse you for the first and foremost reason? They won't.
I am talking about that the psyche of a perpetrator, not of a normal human.
I am also talking about that. I am also saying about this thing only, that what you're saying now, that the gestures of love, so you cannot label it as gestures of love. Those are very momentary gestures to convince you to stay in that space.
Yeah, yes, yes,
Love is a different spectrum.
yes. That's the thing. Like one who loves you will not do play tactics and make you like breadcrumbing, as you said.
Hmm.
Will do that upon you and will be available with you at all the times. And
Yeah, the time you need them, they'll not be there. The time you genuinely need them, they'll not be there. They'll be there to exert power and control. That okay, see, I helped you in this space, so you owe me.
yes,
Love will give you freedom to grow, freedom to be yourself. They will never ever control or exert power.
yes, that will not be the case. Yes. So should we move to the next question?
Yeah, yeah, we should.
So, what tactics do abusers use to control people who have experienced trauma? Like, they know that they are being wrong to the person, and for their personal motives they are doing so. So, what tactics are commonly employed by such person so that the survive victim falls in their trap and not able and becomes unable to recover despite knowing that he is on a loss and he is being used consistently. So those tactics.
See, like I discussed, breaking identities of people, right? Secondly, it could be that they convince you that it's your fault. And in a lot of cases, especially when child abuse is happening, perpetrators, what they do is that they play with child's psychology. They'll threat the child that if you tell anybody, your parents will hit you. If you tell anybody, your parents will not accept you. So they lie. There's lying behavior, there's malicious behavior out there. Sometimes they make false promises to children, like, or maybe bargain with the child, like, if you don't tell about our secret, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. So these are very manipulative behaviors, which, because child is a very innocent being who's not, who doesn't understand what has been happening. So they
He
play
has
with the
not
child
been, he
minds.
has not been to such situations before, and everything is so new for him to
Hmm.
encounter. And when these situations strike upon his face, he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that, can you elaborate more?
Yeah, like we discussed in last few questions, tactics like breaking the identity, using manipulative languages, bargaining with the child, and sometimes also restrict telling somebody that your growth is dependent on me, exerting power and control. These are some of the ways.
Yes. And then and when these things fall upon the survivor, his self-esteem goes down. He
Yeah,
becomes he becomes unaware of his powers and all. He doesn't know what to do, where to go, where to ask for help.
yeah,
And if that comes from family members, it is a double threat to his personal identity and personality.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
So that leads to our next question, that how these people whose self-esteem have been lost can gain the confidence again of the individual.
See, self esteem is again a bigger construct. Firstly, acknowledging that what has happened to them is not their fault altogether. It's not, because a lot of time the shame and guilt is so much internalized that people's self esteem could be affected because of the internalized shame and guilt. And they might blame themselves that, maybe I did something wrong, that's why I deserved it. So telling, even if there's child abuse, there's adult abuse or trauma and all, telling the person that it's not your fault, the first and foremost thing. Secondly, teaching them that their identity is not limited to that particular event, rather is much more, right? Highlighting the positives about the person and enabling them to take a helicopter's view of how identity can be seen in a larger context where they are so much more than this event itself. So, not attaching one's identity to this event.
Yes, like you mentioned, like having a bird's eye view, going
Yeah,
beyond the separating oneself from the situation
hmm.
and seeing it from a larger perspective. So
Yeah,
that is one key takeaway to be taken by the viewers.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Wha- So the next question is, what initial steps can individuals take to begin healing from past traumas and dismantling their invisible walls?
Uh, the first and foremost is, I would say, a lot of time people don't have space to talk about their traumas, right? So it's very important that they do recognize the role of professional help, whether you're going for a counseling, whether you're going for a deeper psychotherapy, trauma focused approaches. That's why nowadays, especially, trauma is recognized widely in our field, and people have started to acknowledge and especially get trained in trauma focused approach, like CPT. When I was receiving my training in CPT, that's a trauma focused therapy, particularly catering to the needs and issues of trauma. Is my voice echoing?
No, it's fine,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Okay, okay. If one person can just mute themselves, because I think my voice is echoing at my end. Hello.
Yeah, it's fine now.
Yeah, now it's fine. So very important that the that you need to contact the trauma focused therapist, because they're specially trained to cater these issues, right? So taking some professional help, building a strong support system, right? You might not need 1,000 people, but if you have just one friend who doesn't make you guilty for things that has happened to you, or one friend, guy, some guide, some mentor, some family member, anybody, but build that support system, trusting somebody, and who is not labeling you in any form. So building that support, that network, acknowledging that something somewhere needs work, right? Becoming aware of your own trauma responses, taking that accountability, that sometimes what people do is that they use their wrong behaviors to justify that, it's because trauma has happened, or because my childhood was like this, that's why I'm continuing to behave wrongly with you. That's not the entire work. Yes, you might have patterns, which is why you're responding this way, but taking accountability, that that's not a justification, I'm going to work on this. Taking accountability for that, that I'm going to take professional help, or maybe some form of guidance, how I can make it a better space for you and for myself, and begin working on it.
All right, ma'am. Now I have the most, I would say, the most healing part of this session, the question that I'm going to ask you that will lead this session towards an end. It is definitely the last but not the least. What some healthy tips you have as a professional to give to the people who are either still stuck into those kind of relationships or now trying their best to come out of that, to so that they can have a healthy coping style, they can emerge as a normal person which they used to be before that kind of toxic relationships and all. Some tips that you would like to give, and also showing the importance of what kind of help do support groups can prescribe to the people, or the therapies can help the people in what ways, briefing out all these things.
Okay. So yes, we're going to wrap up our discussion with a very, very important topic, which is what to do and how to do, right? So addressing these hows and what's are very essential, like Divyansh had initially pointed out. So first step is becoming aware that, like I said, sometimes when you live in denial that it's nothing, it doesn't happen, it doesn't make sense, and it's something that I'll continue to deal with, or suffering alone, but not talking about it, not addressing it. So becoming aware, and then building a space which is healthier. Like a lot of time people might have the strong support system in forms of friends and family. Identifying somebody who is sensitive and mature enough to understand this. If not, go for a professional help. That's the best way, right? Because that person is professionally trained to address these issues. Secondly, is when you're becoming aware of your own personality pattern as a result of childhood trauma, or as a result of some unhealed wound or a past event, understanding that that's your trauma response, right? That you've learned a certain way, but it can be unlearned, and it can be worked upon. It holds the greatest capacity. It's not fixed. It's something that is amiable to change, right? I just have to look at it from a lens that what I learned was dysfunctional. What are the healthier ways of responding, right? So if I'm an avoidant person and I learned that emotions are not to be trusted, emotions have no role in life and all, and that's the learning that I'm following, one can always take a step back, understand where does it come from, originating from your childhood experience. Okay, over there I learned. Why did I learn? Because nobody responded to my needs at that time. Who is it that is ready to take that need, accept that need, and not shame that need at present? How can I always then start with expressing yourself, even though you don't want to go all over the place by expressing yourself fully? Taking small steps, taking slow and gradual steps, like talking about your emotions, how you felt in a day, what emotions you are experiencing in a day, talking about it to your partner who is healthily accepting it and not shaming you for that. Then, following that, talking about your vulnerabilities also. Vulnerabilities are a powerful tool to strengthen any kind of bond. Not to be not to be dependent on the person that you will fix me, but sharing with that person gently. Sometimes what we do is while we share, we also expect the other person that now this is my pattern, you will fix it. My partner has to fix it. No, that's not the correct way. Vulnerabilities, sharing it, like how hard it was for you, what it did to you, how you responded to it previously, now how you want to learn to respond to it in a healthier manner. So that's a very beautiful way of taking accountability, addressing it, and also making vulnerability as a power.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope like the people, yeah, Divyansh, please add your things.
So, as ma'am said, that we have to take a step back and share our and let's see who can we can be vulnerable to which one person. So I think in that girls are more emotionally intelligent and boys just at random means they do not they are not able to recover from whatever happened to them, and so they have more difficulty in taking a step back and looking at it retrospectively from a bird's eye view. So what are your views on that, ma'am? And that
See,
it is this
definitely.
across genders, or
Sorry, Divyansh, I just missed the last part. There was some network issue.
so I was saying that taking a step back and having a look at the problem retrospectively, are it is the same problem across both the genders, or there is some difference?
See, it's not that men lack emotions or men have deficits in emotions, but when a man experiences or tries to express emotion, a man gets shamed for that, right? It's not accepted. Men do not cry. So there's societal norms, rigid norms that discourages men to express, and then what they learn as a result of those norms, that they learn that emotions, what's the point of expressing it? So I think we have to look at it again from a lens where what has happened to men rather than men don't do emotions. So stories of men has to be collectively, deconstructed and heard, because as children, in my own family I have seen that few once my cousin brother, he was just about to cry on something, and then somebody just shamed him that, are you a girl, why are you crying and all. So these statements, men grow up hearing that, and then as adults, if you're expecting that, open up, talk about your emotions and all, it's hard for them. But just be curious to know their side of the story, and then you'll discover what they go through. So those gender norms, emotions have no gender, and we have to accept that. Do not attach any gender to an emotion. Like, girls experience this emotion, men experience this emotion. Girls are better at emotions, men are not better at emotions. We have to tell them that emotions are emotions regardless of the gender.
Exactly. We can brief it out as men and their problem is not the actual issue. The stereotypes that we have just built in the society is the problem here in terms of
Yeah,
expressing the emotions.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, Divyansh. So, do you want to go ahead or can I conclude?
Yes, let's conclude.
All right. So, I hope the people who are here got to know a number of things regarding the topic of traumas, and not only the causes, but also, ma'am beautifully shared the healing
Divyansh,
process.
please mute yourself.
Yeah, so also she talked about the healing process so precisely, like stepping out so many ideas that people can try to come up from that toxic relationships. So now the platform is open for you all, those who are here. If you have any questions you want to ask, any doubt you want to clarify, you can just unmute yourself and speak. Those who want to type their questions in the chat box, they can do so as well. Yes, Divyansh.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, what is the current trend about the invisible wall? That has it been in the wall has been widening over the few past few years, or it has been narrowing with the therapeutics therapies being involved and new therapies are being introduced every new year at the gap of 5 to 10 years, like CBT, REBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So has the
Uh, See, it's not that wounds have less. It's not that it has that invisible wall has lessened or decreased or increased and all. The conversations and help-seeking behavior has increased, especially post-COVID. People are at least now talking about something that they have dealt with over the years in closets.
So the conversation has been increasing with the rise of online ease of awareness,
Awareness, and yeah.
resources like like we are conversing through online media
Mm.
and offline also there are facilities. So there has been some work surely done to manage that barrier.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, is there anyone who will want to ask anything? Or if not, please show us a thumbs up so that we can wrap up the session. All right. Prajna, Palak, do you guys have something to ask? All right, all right. I saw the thumbs ups right now. Okay, so thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us at SciConnect and providing us with a number of enriching knowledge that yet to be discovered with us it was. But now we just came up with a lot of ideas that not only we can suggest to someone, we will start it definitely from employing to our own lives. So yeah, thank you so much for that. We would just love to hear from you again, something more in more detail because the time is not allowing us to do so right now. But definitely we are leaving it for future.
Thank you for your effort into this, because I think it's through platforms through like these we get to, um, we get to spread awareness and we get to speak about these topics. These are very sensitive topics, and people need accessibility and awareness for that. So thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much, all the
Okay.
people who have joined. All right. So I'm just ending the session. We will really hope to see all the participants again in our coming sessions. Thank you so much for joining.